Welcome, everybody. This is the Lawyer Show podcast. Welcome, everybody. This is the Lawyer Show podcast, but you already knew that was coming. My name is Jeremy Rosenthal. I'm your lawyer. The Lawyer Show podcast is just is our weekly attempt to try to explain to the planet and other lawyers what we do, what different lawyers do, what different lawyer practices are. It's been a few weeks. We've been gone for a few weeks. We've maybe had our summer vacation. How's that? I know that none of you have really missed us because I know that there may very well likely be none of you. But we'll see. If you happen to stumble on the podcast on Facebook or YouTube or iTunes or Spotify or anywhere else we try to trick folks into watching us or listening to us, then you'll know that we are back from a few weeks. So today on the Lawyer Show podcast, one of the things too with the Lawyer Show podcast that I've tried to do is I really do recycle a lot of the same jokes and a lot of the same material, which again probably nobody really knows because you'd have to watch more than one episode, and other than myself and probably a few people that I sort of make watch it. Nobody really sees, but I do recycle a lot of the same shtick, a lot of the same material, a lot of the same things. One of those is sort of the darker side of being a lawyer, right? Sort of the soul-crushing sociopathy that as lawyers we sort of become after 4, 5, 10, 15 years. But there's certain people running around I've noticed that have law licenses that are lawyers. There's just too much sunlight there. There's just too much. There's too much to drown out. There's just too much. There's certain people out there that just cannot be crushed. Their souls, their goodness, their creativity, you just can't stop it. So today my guest is a friend of mine who I haven't seen in probably 20 years. Her name is Rudri Bhatt Patel. Rudri and I went to law school together at SMU, and it appears to me by all accounts that Rudri has escaped. She has escaped the trappings of practicing law, and she has gone out and done some really, really cool things that I think are going to be very interesting for us to kind of talk about. So I'm going to introduce my co-counsel today, Rudri Bhatt Patel, and before I do need to kind of brag on her just a little bit. So she is a lawyer who's basically turned into a writer/editor. She had a background in English before going to law school. She is on staff at Literary Mama. She's also worked with a group called Pidgeonholes, or excuse me, her work has appeared in Pidgeonholes, Milk Candy Review, The Washington Post, Business Insider, Saveur, I think I'm pronouncing that right, Dame, Brain, Child Magazine, ESPN, I've heard of them, Mother's Always Right, the Phoenix and New York and Phoenix New Times, and elsewhere. And after butchering that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to my co-counsel to introduce herself, Rudri Bhatt Patel. How you been, Rudri?
I'm well. Thanks, Jeremy, for having me on your podcast. I'm pleased to be here. And yes, it's been quite a few years since we've connected since law school, but glad to reconnect and offer my perspective on what's happened since we graduated.
Yeah, so last time that you and I worked together, you recall we were at SMU. They made us do, or they gave us the privilege. We had the privilege of teaching fifth graders at a local elementary school, and you and I were partners at that. And I don't remember. I remember it was on Washington Avenue. It was a school that was quite challenged. Do you remember?
Yeah, I do. I do remember.
And it's long enough ago that obviously we don't even need to follow up with any of these kids. Obviously, they're leaders in their communities. Obviously, they have gone on to set the world on fire because of our fifth grade civics and government teaching.
Yeah, I mean, I think, that was an interesting experience. And I feel like I've come full circle teaching those kids about law. And now I have the privilege of teaching adults and kids about writing. So that's been neat to see how things that I did in law school are now appearing in my writing life.
Talk about a little bit about that. So talk about the Sunlight Press, and talk about just kind of how you got into it.
So I practiced law for about 8 years in Dallas, and in 2009, my husband had a job relocation, and so we moved out to Phoenix. Unfortunately, during that same year, I lost my dad to cancer, and I had a young daughter, and I also gave up my legal job. And so in 2009, we moved to Phoenix, Arizona, and I decided that I did not want to take the Arizona bar. So that left me in a little bit of a dilemma on what to do next. And so luckily, before I went to law school, I had the opportunity to get my English degree, and I had a master's in English with an emphasis in creative writing. So I've always loved words. And so to channel the grief of losing my dad, I started a blog. And then fast forward, in the last decade or so, I decided to write and freelance. And one day I was writing for lit journals, and I actually managed another lit journal that's no longer exists, which was called The First Day. And the manager of that journal decided that they no longer wanted to continue with that project. So a colleague and I that worked at The First Day decided we were going to create our own journal called the Sunlight Press. And we started that 5 years ago. And it is a nonprofit. It is a literary journal that features essays, fiction, photography, poetry, book reviews. And we're proud to say that as co-founders and owners of the Lit Journal, we pay all our writers and artists, which is not the norm in the Lit Journal world.
Well, congratulations on that. That's these things are, I think they start out right as sort of labors of love. And if you can generate enough revenue to pay talent, right, to pay the folks who are generating the content for you, that I would think that definitely puts you above and beyond where other folks in your industry are.
Well, we did, put in our own funds to establish the website, and then we've had a couple of grants that have come our way. And then, obviously, because we're a lit journal and because we're a nonprofit, we don't take any revenue ourselves, and we basically rely on donations and our own funds and grants to pay our artists and writers, because we don't, the big thing is for writers to, be given credit for the work that they do. We can't allow them to just give their work away for free, because just because it's art doesn't mean that there isn't labor involved.
Right. Talk a little bit about when you initially started to blog. What were you blogging about? What were the topics? How are you gaining a foothold in the blogging world?
So I started blogging in October of 2009, and essentially because I was a young 30-something, I didn't have a lot of people I knew that had experienced loss like I had with my dad. And so I was just looking for a place to sort of allow my grief to land. And so initially I just started blogging about what it felt like to grieve and what it felt like to lose a parent and what it felt like to lose a parent and also raise a child at the same time. And so I was just blogging on different topics in and around grief. And then, at first only like friends and family were paying attention. And then, of course, in 2009, blogging was, the big thing. Now, of course, it's, podcasting and Snapchat and Facebook Live and all those things. But at the time, there was a rich blogging community. So you would just start meeting people in the blogging community who would just leave comments or recommend your blog to somebody else. And so essentially, the blog gained a foothold by word of mouth and by the virtual community. They're quite supportive in the sense that they will, if they like something, they'll let everybody know about it. So I had to do very little, advertising on my own in terms of having readers visit my blog. So that was great. I made a lot of connections in the virtual community, and I'm happy to call some of those people my friends now. So it's been great.
It's been so I have a blog. The big difference, I'd say a major difference, is when I'm blogging, I'm targeting folks with legal problems. I'm targeting folks that have very specific questions about the law. And I've always kind of wondered, it's just going to be how much more challenging it would be to draw in an audience with topics that are not your house is on fire, right? So by way of example, when I would write a blog, I just listen to questions that I get asked in the office, right? Well, is my driver's license going to get suspended? How is this going to work, right? Are they going to take away my kids from me? And so I know that's what folks are Googling at 3 a.m. So it's easy for me in some ways to find readers because I've got people who are having an emergency in their life and they're specifically looking for this content. On the other hand, when you're there, I mean, you have to, because there's a lot of folks who are putting out material on the internet that, it would be just so much harder. I think it would be just so much harder to get a foothold doing what you were doing than, say, a professional blog. And so how long did you blog for before you really saw the thing starting to move?
So I would say I probably blogged for a couple of years, and then I decided, hey, I shouldn't just give all this content, or some of the things that I was blogging about could very well be articles or personal essays. And so basically a couple of years in, I pivoted and I started writing for parenting websites. I started expanding my wheelhouse into writing about, parenting or sports. And then, then decided to write in the food area, interviewing chefs for profiles and also reviewing restaurants. And so basically, the blog was in the background. I probably blogged pretty consistently for about 6 to 7 years. And then I no longer blog because most of my time is taken up with writing for other outlets. But I think, the blogging, what it afforded me was giving me that daily, weekly practice of just writing and putting my thoughts out there for whoever wanted to see. And so I think it, as writers, sometimes we talk about imposter syndrome, like, is our writing good enough? And so I think it just allowed me to sort of squash those thoughts and just write. And so, I don't know now. I mean, I think there's still people that do blog, but I don't know. I think if you look at it as part of a process and not for necessarily an audience. I think it can be beneficial in other areas if you decide to pivot to writing articles or writing essays or even teaching.
Mm-hmm. So when you started your venture before the Sunlight Press, and it was with the same person who you founded the Sunlight Press with? You worked with her. That's where you met.
She was a writer that I managed. Her name's Beth Burrell, and she's out in Pennsylvania. And then we just started talking, and I had never actually met her in person. I had only known her virtually and through her writing, and so we just had a series of phone calls, and she was willing to offer half of the financial commitment on, putting up the website. And I was willing to do the same, and our personalities meshed. And so, 5 years later, we're still here, and we've gained a lot of traction with lit journal readers, and it's been a very successful venture.
How would you describe the Sunlight Press?
Well, the Sunlight Press is for new and established writers, and it's really about moments in a person's life where they come upon an epiphany, and the epiphany doesn't necessarily need to be a sad one. It can be a happy one. So we really encourage, it's really a broad appeal, like for writers to pen thoughts about light and darkness. And so our audience is really readers from any area who want to learn a little more about a writer and in his or her struggles, at least in essays, or a fiction piece that's just really well written. And then we also have a lot of poets that are that we feature that are award winning. So poetry that also talks about light and dark.
Are people surprised that you're a lawyer? Sorry, go ahead.
No, and I should plug photography as well. Like, we have some wonderful photographers that, we feature their work as well. Mm-hmm. In terms of, are people surprised that I'm a lawyer? In the writing world, it actually doesn't matter if you're a lawyer. So it doesn't really cost much unless someone looks at my bio and says, "Oh, hey, you were a lawyer. Why are you a writer?" And honestly, Jeremy, I don't think it's that much of a pivot from being a lawyer to a writer, because, lawyers and writers deal with words, whether it's in the courtroom or it's in an essay. So I don't necessarily think it's that much of a stretch, at least in my opinion.
Okay, so this is all right. Now, just to kind of not play devil's advocate or anything like that, I'll tell you a story which will probably shock and horrify you. I've got an aunt, and she is a psychologist, psychiatrist. I forget what the difference is. She's one of those, right? And I was telling her back way, man, I may have had a license for a year, maybe 2 years, something like that. And I was in mediation, which is sort of this, they advertise it and they bill it as this sort of kumbaya, we're all going to get along, we're going to bake a cake, everybody's going to walk out of here a winner, right? In reality, it's like everything else in the profession. There's a lot of interpersonal dynamics, which aren't always the most pleasant. You run into manipulative personalities, you run into passive aggressiveness, you run into controlling things. And I think I had a pretty hard day. I told my aunt, I said, no, at the end of this mediation, and she was telling me, it would be really interesting to have a therapist at the mediation or a psychologist at the mediation, and they could deal with the underlying feelings. And I'm like, no. Really what the mediation is about is I'm pardon my language, just this is a family-oriented show for the most part, but I find that sometimes profanity is necessary, I said, I'm going to fucking tell the other side what they're going to do, and then I'm going to tell the other side how they're going to fucking feel about it. And she was just, oh my God, I can't believe, Jeremy, how could you say these things? And then I look at sort of, and so when we juxtapose the writing aspect and the creative aspect of lawyering and what you are doing as a writer, what you are doing is extremely soulful, it's extremely thoughtful, it's extremely creative. And when I joke in the beginning about, the sociopathy, I'm not entirely, it's not 100% a joke. I mean, lawyers, we do sort of, I'm at the point in my career, people come in and something has happened which has completely rearranged their life. And to me, it's Wednesday. So I guess that's kind of the part about what you do that sort of fascinates me, is how, yes, you're writing not much differently than you would write, I suppose, otherwise. But at the same time, you really are in my mind, dramatically shifting gears from a left brain, right brain. Is any of that making sense?
Yeah. So I hear you. Yes, there is a, creative element that takes place in essay writing or fiction writing that is, it is different, right? Than, writing a brief or a motion. But I think what appeals to me is that whether you're a lawyer or a writer, you're telling stories, or you're narrating something that's happened to a client, or you're narrating something that's happened to you. And so the medium is different. But I do agree that writing creatively, the writing that I do does afford me the license to sort of play, which with words, which I can see as an attorney, you can't necessarily do that in a motion, so, or even in oral argument, or in trial. So I guess in trial there is a little more freedom, but yeah, I hear what you're saying. Yes, yeah. there is that sense of creative license that you can't always employ in a courtroom or in a brief.
But you still do have a license, and you maintain it, and you were telling me a little bit beforehand. Talk a little bit about the legal work that you are able to do in conjunction.
So, because I've maintained my license, I am able to talk to other attorneys. I feel like when I tell people I'm a writer and I'm talking to an attorney, and then I tell them, oh yeah, hey, by the way, I'm also an attorney too. There's sort of this like relief that I hear from the attorney, and so then I can talk about, I do some writing for law firms, and so they don't need to necessarily tell me, like, how a particular case works or what they want me to cover. It's sort of like, okay, here's the assignment, you go. So I am grateful for my legal background, because it has afforded me some opportunities in the writing world that I probably wouldn't have gotten if I didn't have the legal know-how. So yeah, I'm surprised of the range of topics that I cover, for anything from like IP law to, the legalities of the COVID vaccine to AI and patents. So I do get some interesting topics in my legal writing, and it's fun to revisit that world in that capacity.
I read something interesting about AI. I don't know if you've heard this or not, but I think they've determined that criminal defense lawyers, we would be like the very last people to be replaced by AI. I'm sure it's coming for us too. Have you heard that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's some rulings out of South Africa that a particular AI system could be patented in their country, which is not the case here in the United States. So we'll see, what will happen. It remains to be seen, but all this interesting dynamics are coming up in IP law about AI and what to do with it. And it's quite fascinating, all of the different realms AI could replace. I guess fascinating and scary at the same time.
Yeah, is it so the creative side, is that right brain or is that left brain? Do you know, Heidi, is it right brain or left brain? Do you know, Rudri? I mean, of course this was the lawyer show podcast, not the doctor show podcast, but creative is right brain.
I
okay.
mean, I think you can, yeah.
So,
but I think you can make an argument that you even in creative writing, you use some of your left brain, and that you're trying to structure a narrative through different paragraphs, and so I do sometimes borrow from my legal side, even when I'm trying to be creative. So I don't know, right brain, left brain.
See, I think what I'm
work
the further
simultaneously.
The further right brain you go, the harder it is for AI to replicate what it is you do. For instance, right, going back to the Sunlight Press, I mean, how is AI supposed to know what picturesque photography looks like? How would AI possibly know what it feels like to grieve for a parent? How would AI possibly know how to interpret, when your child says, "I don't want to eat that"? What are we really saying here, right? My daughter, she's in the phase where she's like, I'm going to say out front that I don't like this, and then when I taste it, I'm still not going to admit that I like it, even though I might. AI just cannot, at least not now, do that. And in criminal defense context, I'd like to see a computer sweet talk a jury out of letting a drug dealer go who crashed in somebody's swimming pool after being chased by the police. Not that I've ever handled a case like that. But you get the point. Because again, this is just sort of more of the theme of right brain, left brain, and because again, I just see what you're doing is so just different and dynamic. But you do borrow from your left brain, you're saying. You do borrow. There is a little analytical. How much of that creeps into some of the creative work that you do?
I try not to let it creep in too much, because it could be, sometimes, when I get my own work edited, they're like, "Hey, Rudri, you're not showing enough emotion here," or, "I need more details," or, things that I know that sometimes, the structure of like writing a brief might interfere with the creative side. So I have to sort of, I can sometimes feel when I'm emotionally distant from a creative piece and know that it's not working well, and I know that I have to dive deeper and become more vulnerable. So in that way, I guess I'm aware of it's almost like, once you go to law school and take the bar exam and practice, you're not going to forget those skills. So, they do creep in, but in creative writing, the goal is to be not as structured and offer lyrical prose and ideas that sort of push the emotional side versus the analytical side.
And another, I think, advantage would be to on the creative writing side is when I'm arguing a case, for instance, naturally anybody watching knows that I always believe my arguments and I always believe the side that I'm advocating for. But sometimes we have, as lawyers, we have to sell ourselves on our client, or we have to sell ourselves on our narrative, even though subconsciously we may not be there. We may be, like you said, detached from it. When you're writing creatively, though, you mentioned kind of expressing vulnerability and showing vulnerability. That's hard to do practicing law.
Yeah, I think a good essay or a good piece of fiction, or actually any kind of writing, you try to make the personal universal, and you make the universal personal, and that's certainly something that doesn't always work in the legal domain. So um, I think the place where creativity and law meet is that you do need to humanize in the case of a law case or a client. You may need to humanize your client in some way, and in the creative specter, you need to make whatever story you're telling more relatable and accessible to your reader. So there's limits to that in the legal world, and in the creative world that, there's not as many limits. So that part of it is quite different than what you would see in the practice of law.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Because also I know that when I believe what I'm saying to the jury, I know that I know intuitively that it's working or would work a lot better than a jury can smell. Just like your audience can smell something that's insincere, they can smell a rat. If I don't believe what I'm telling them, you have to be honest with the jury, even if you are doing in trial what we call kissing the ugly baby. Sometimes we don't get to make all the facts, and sometimes some of the facts are just going to hurt us. And so I see what you're saying too, because that there has to be that synchrony, right? That marriage, if you will, between the story, your narrative, and your belief system, and where, frankly, your heart is, right? That's no different in creative writing than it would be in advocacy.
Yeah, I think, in creative writing, there's this thing where your readers are bright and intelligent, and if you're trying to talk about a situation or a trauma or a particular vulnerability, and you're not being authentic about it, more than likely the reader's going to be able to sniff that out and say, like, hey, there's distance here. What she's trying to say is just not really landing on me in any way, or it's not impactful. And so, yes, I think, ultimately as a creative, you got to be willing to tell the truth.
Except with a jury, though, because you said your readers are intelligent and smart, and I'm sure that they probably are. And we all, I don't know, we do a lot of jury bashing, and we kind of kick them around, which is exactly, yeah, anyway. Do you like writing, compare writing with practicing law from the standpoint of, what do you like to do? Which do you like more? My guess is, well, I'll just let you talk. I mean, which do you prefer? It's a dumb question. I'm sorry, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, no, you're good. You're good. I enjoy writing because I'm my own boss. I can take the assignments that I want. I can take the assignments that I don't want. I have the flexibility of writing anywhere at any time in any venue. All I need is my laptop. So it does afford me some time for flexibility and embracing other roles, like parenting our daughter, or, attending like some of her tennis tournaments and that kind of thing. I wouldn't say that I think the practice of law, at least in the way I was doing it, the hours were super long, and obviously I had a boss, and so you have to definitely answer to someone. That in the writing spectrum, you do answer to editors, but it's a different relationship. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't say I dislike the practice of law. I just think I like writing is probably more aligned with my natural, like I just enjoy it more in the sense that it comes a little more natural to to me than the practice of law.
How would you advise younger lawyers to enjoy life more? Maybe, well, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I think whether you're a writer or a lawyer or any profession, I think self-care is really important. I know a lot of lawyers might dismiss that as hokey, but, it matters. It matters that you, for instance, like I have a gratitude practice that I start my day with every morning. I list 5 things that I'm grateful for. I journal pretty regularly. I run and I walk, and sometimes incorporate meditation through that. And I think it's allowed me to be a better person and a better writer because I am taking care of things that are meaningful to me and set the tone of my day. And I think a lot of people argue, well, I don't have time for that, or hey, she's a writer, she's her own boss, and so she has time for that. I have to actually, drive to the law firm and go to my office and have FaceTime with the partner. And I get all that. I'm mindful of that. But honestly, the things that I'm asking people to do in terms of self-care only take like 5 to 15 minutes. And I found that if you truly want something, you'll pretty much do whatever you can to get, to do it. I think for me, in terms of a young lawyer starting out, I would say like, make sure you do the things that you really enjoy or things that set the tone for your day, because you don't want a series of like months and years passing by without like taking care of yourself.
Because you could turn into this right here. I mean, I'm kidding. I think, I don't know. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. I mean, I told you beforehand that I do this in part out of catharsis. And it is. I mean, It's fun. It's fun to come here. It's fun to, to talk to folks, to learn about different areas. I will say this, doing this podcast, I have gotten to speak to so many different lawyers about so many different areas that you kind of, it's pretty, we're all different, but we're all the same. I mean, all our water cooler talk is, we have it in our office, and man, I don't care where you are, whether you're in the biggest law firm of Dallas or at a government office. I mean, you're still gonna have that. It's harder, I think. And as a younger lawyer, of course, I'm still very young as a lawyer. You can tell, right? Even though it's been 20 years, I mean, you can hardly tell from me. And a point I was going to make too is that, and that's another part of the Lawyer Show podcast is I see bunny trails and I just follow them. Back to the elementary school that we taught at, those kids, I remember how excited. I don't know about you. I was really like, yes, this is going to be great. We're going to mold young minds. And I remember that we had like lesson plans, and we had like, I want to call them exhibits. They're not, what do you call them when you're teachers thing, right? Like we had like poster board, and we were teaching the kids about government and all that stuff. And first 2-3 classes, we were just, at least I was just really charged up and excited about it. And by like November and December, I was like, okay, all of you are going to sit the F down, and all of you are going to shut up, and we're going to get through this hour. So that it gave me a new appreciation for teachers. But kind of circling back around, as a young lawyer, I don't know that I really I heard other lawyers say, well, you got to take care of yourself. Well, you got to do this, you got to do that. And at that point, I guess it's kind of lost, because when you're young, you just don't appreciate, I don't know, some of the stress, some of the strain that the years will kind of tack on, right? When you started blogging, my guess, it's a guess, is that you weren't thinking, this is going to be my living. This is going to be, I'm just going, or was it like you didn't, it didn't sound like this was something that you switched a gear and said, this is going to be me from now on 3 times a day.
No, I mean, I had a lot of, when I first started blogging, obviously I was not getting paid for it. And so, there's a lot of like, oh, what am I doing? I don't think I ever thought it would be a pivot into where I am now. In fact, I thought there was a lot of times when I was like, oh, I just need to hunker down and just study there for the Arizona bar. And I actually borrowed some books from someone who had taken the bar exam, and the familiar Barbary books. And they were in my closet for quite a while, and I just never opened them up. And then ultimately, I was able to pivot into making writing, a little more lucrative than I had been when I was blogging. And then I just started building on that. And now I'm happy to say, like, it's like my own business, but in the writing realm, not in the legal realm. So it's like owning a law firm, but it's more creative writing oriented, or writing in general, and teaching.
And probably web page things, right? Optimization, managing it, running it, making sure that the folks who are writing for you, making sure people can find their content. Probably that's not something that you thought you were signing up for at SMU School of Law, 2000 or 1999, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, I would say definitely, I'm able to juggle so many roles because of the law school training and being a lawyer. But I'm definitely one of those people that if someone had told me 20 years ago, oh, you're going to be a writer and you're going to have a lit journal that you co-founded and co-owned, and you're going to teach classes on brief writing, I would have pretty much laughed in your face and would have said, no, I'm going to be a partner at a firm, or I'm going to own my own law firm. Like, this was not in my landscape at all. Like, I was very much committed to being a lawyer and wanting to do that since I was in high school.
So where's this going to go? Tell us about 10 years from now. What do you think this looks like on the writing side of it?
Well, I hope to continue to write. I hope to secure bylines in different places that I haven't reached currently. I hope to be teaching more classes. And ultimately, a lot of writers have questions on the legal side of things in terms of contracts and, royalties, and, oh, what if, this outlet that contracted my work doesn't pay me? So I'm in the process of actually developing a workshop and potentially an ebook on what writers should know about the law. So, that's exciting. So hopefully I'm doing much of the same, writing, teaching, maybe more, appearing on podcasts, and just working on developing my process.
So do you guys get, and forgive me if I don't mean to pry too much, but that's what the Lawyer Show podcast is about. You guys get paid by sponsors, by web provider. How does the revenue come into the nonprofit such that you can pay for the writers?
So we have we have readers that will donate. Obviously, friends that will donate. So we generally rely on paying writers through the donations we receive from grants. Sometimes companies that individuals work for are willing to give grants to the Sunlight Press. And so we're always, obviously in the last few years since the pandemic, we haven't been soliciting as much for donations, just because we understand that people may not be in the position to donate to a nonprofit literary journal. So we have been putting in some of our own funds, but honestly, we really rely on our readers and subscribers to give us the revenue to help us pay for artists and writers who choose to write for us.
So you get okay. So from viewers like you, like the PBS, like the NPR, and in all seriousness, probably doing grant work and applying for grants, searching for grants. That's a skill too. That's not something. That's not a lawyer skill, and that's probably another skill that you've had to develop.
Yeah, I mean, the applying for grants, it's quite competitive. Some of the grants we have gotten, a lot of them we haven't. So yeah, that's also been an education. And I, with the help of my colleague, we created a 501c3, which obviously we didn't have to hire an attorney to do that. So that saved us some money on that end. But yeah, I've had to use some of my legal knowledge in my creative endeavors, which have come in handy.
Right. What is your favorite piece that you have authored? Where can we find it, and why is it your favorite thing? I didn't tell you this was coming. I sent you an outline to trick you, which I can tell by the look on your face was marginally successful. But yeah, talk about what one or more than one of your favorite pieces, and I also want to know, and I think I don't know if I read your ESPN piece because I keep up with you on Facebook, and if you shared it there, I read a lot of because I'm searching for a soul, and so I'm like, man, I really need to read what Rudri's writing here, and maybe it's not geared for me, but man, this stuff can't hurt. Anyway, go ahead.
So one of my favorite, it's hard to pick a favorite. I enjoy all of the pieces I write, but one that I am really proud of is, it's called Becoming, and it's in Pidgeonholes, and it's about the 5 stages of grief. And it's a nonfiction short piece about what it was like to receive, the ashes after my father was cremated. And so it's a very short piece, but I feel like it really explores the different shades of grief and what it at least meant for me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You said that you teach grief writing. Talk a little bit about that. Talk a little bit about that, because that seems that seems pretty nuanced.
Well, so I write for an organization, or they advertise most of my classes through writers.com. And basically I teach, one of the classes I teach is a grief essay class. It's 8 weeks. And I basically take, my students' stories, or I have them share their stories of grief. And I try to get them to craft a narrative out of all that sadness and pain. And during the course of 8 weeks, they're responsible for writing a few essays. The classes are taught through Zoom. We meet every week for 8 weeks, and students, I teach for an hour and a half every week, and then students are responsible for turning in work, and I give them feedback and critique, and then we take it from there. And so I find the best way to handle grief is sometimes to write about it.
Do you think you're ever going to hang them up? Do you think you're ever going to be done with the practice of law, with the writing? Or when I talk to most lawyers, depending on what kind of law they do, like for me, for instance, I'm probably never going to retire. I'm probably just gonna. I will show up one day and I'm going to die with my second cup of coffee on the table, and they might not know it for an hour. That's going to be me. With the creative stuff, is this something you see yourself doing kind of in perpetuity?
Yeah, Yeah, I think that's the benefit of being a creative. Like, you can do it forever because um, you're able to, mold your own time and come up with your own essays or, potentially a book or a memoir. And so I don't. I think for me, writing is like breathing. So I don't see myself ever um, wanting to stop. And I never. I mean, I can't ever say, oh, it's with 100% certainty that I'll never go back to the law. I don't think I can say that either. But I think maybe there's a sliver of just a little bit of an opening in the future if I ever decide to move back to Texas to practice law again. Um, but for now, I think the writing door is completely open, and I see that being the case forever, actually.
How do you cure writer's block? What's the remedy for that? Or do you not experience that? My guess is that you do, but how do you? What's the fix?
I don't actually believe in writer's block. I'm going to borrow from another writer named Seth Godin, who talks about block, and it's like, hey, if you've got to argue a motion in front of a judge in like 40 minutes, are you going to have like lawyer block, or does a plumber have plumber block? Or
do you want a truthful answer to that, or no? Okay, keep going.
The point is, like, if you wait for inspiration, it's not going to come. Like, successful writers push through even when circumstances aren't ideal to write the article or to pen the essay or to keep moving on a book. So yes, are there times when I don't feel like writing? Sure. It's probably the case with you too. There are probably times when you don't feel like lawyering, but we're professionals. We believe in our work. We want to do a good job. So as much as it sounds like a cliche, sometimes the only way out is through. And for me, that means sitting down and writing, even if it's hard.
How do you know when you're done with a piece?
That's a great question.
Did you hear that, Heidi? A great question. I did it. A great question. Okay, let's have it.
I think, I'm fortunate that I have writers that I trust that read my work before I submit. I don't know if you can ever say that a piece is done, but sometimes if you're striving for perfection, you'll never submit. So writers have a saying that says done is better than perfect. And so at a certain point, you're going to have to submit your work, even if you don't think it's like in the best place that it can be.
Yeah, in the lawyer, I had a lawyer who I used to work for. He used to say, "There's no such thing as a finished product. There's just a deadline. At some point you gotta. At some point you're just done." But yeah, and so I was curious to know from a creative standpoint, like at what point do you look at a piece of work and say, "That's it. That's what I mean." And it sounds like it doesn't sound a lot different than when we might have a deadline on something. I think we're just about out of time. So before we go, let's let's pimp your website a little bit more. Let's pimp your everything that we need to throw out there. So where can our viewer or viewers see where can they see you, and where can they see your work, and where can they see the works of your colleagues?
Well, you can find me on RudriBhattPatel.com. You can find our lit journal at thesunlightpress.com. If you're interested in classes, you can find me on writers.com, and I'm on Twitter at Rudri B Patel, and so you can always reach out to me there. And if you have a question about writing or anything else dealing with how to pivot, if you're an attorney or in terms of writing, you can contact me via my email, which is rudrip@gmail.com.
Well, thank you very much. This has been very fun to catch up with you, Rudri, and maybe we'll talk again before 20 more years have elapsed, right? So anyway,
yeah,
this has been another ridiculously successful episode of the Lawyer Show podcast. We'll see everybody next week, unless we don't.
Thanks so much, Jeremy.